Here's one thing that Abdul El-Sayed's victory in Michigan tells us. People say it can't be done, but when you fight for the right things, you can build the people power needed to overcome big money. What did Abdul run on? To get money out of politics, to put money in your pocket, and to pass Medicare for all. Well, when costs are up and Trump is seemingly doing everything but bringing costs down, that's a pretty good message. And it's how Abdul was able to build a true grassroots movement in Michigan that was strong enough to beat back millions of dollars in dark money. And that grassroots movement is exactly what's going to get Abdul across the finish line in November, because we know how to win by fighting for working people. Don't forget that.
It's just after midnight in Detroit, and the numbers on the screen refuse to move the way anyone expected. Somewhere in a hotel ballroom, aides are staring at their phones, refreshing. Because the story everyone thought they knew, the safe, establishment-backed frontrunner cruising to victory, is quietly falling apart in real time. And the man they were told couldn't win is 1 percentage point away from doing exactly that. This is the story of how Abdul El-Sayed pulled off one of the most improbable upsets in recent Michigan political history, and how he did it not by winning the state, but by winning just enough of it in just the right places at just the right moment. Let's rewind. For months, this Senate primary was framed as a formality. Haley Stevens had the money. She had the machine. She had the backing of Michigan's most powerful Democrats, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, retiring Senator Gary Peters, the entire party establishment lined up behind her like a wall. On the other side stood El-Sayed, a progressive insurgent fueled by grassroots energy, endorsed by national figures like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but facing a financial gap that should have buried him. And for a while, it looked like it might. Stevens had the institutional advantages. She had the map. In fact, when the dust finally settled, Stevens had won more counties than El-Sayed, a lot more. She swept Detroit. She dominated Oakland and Macomb. She ran the table across the thumb and much of northern Michigan. By almost every traditional measure of a winning campaign, Stevens should be standing at that podium giving the victory speech. But she isn't, because El-Sayed didn't need to win the map. He needed to win the right pieces of it, and he needed those pieces to explode. Picture Arbor. Picture Grand Rapids. Picture the streets around Michigan State and western Michigan and central Michigan. These are places where El-Sayed didn't just win, he obliterated the competition. In Kent County, in Washtenaw County, vote shares above 60%. In some and Arbor precincts, over 70%. In pockets of Grand Rapids, more than 80% of voters chose him. This wasn't a narrow edge. This was a landslide concentrated like a laser in liberal strongholds and college towns, and it was enough to offset everything he was losing everywhere else. Because, make no mistake, he was losing a lot. El-Sayed becomes the first Democrat in nearly a decade to win a Michigan statewide primary without carrying Wayne, Oakland, or Macomb County, the beating heart of Metro Detroit, the traditional kingmaker of Michigan Democratic politics. The last person to pull that off was Bernie Sanders back in 2016. And there's a deeper warning buried in these numbers too. In counties with significant black populations, Stevens crushed him, winning 7 of 12 such counties by an average margin of over 8 points, including Wayne, Saginaw, and Genesee. El-Sayed's wins in this category came almost entirely from university towns, Ingham, Kalamazoo, Washtenaw, places where the demographics skew young and progressive, not necessarily reflective of the coalition he'll need in November. He becomes the first Michigan Democrat since 2018 to win a primary without carrying the city of Detroit itself, where Stevens took well over 60% of the vote. So, how does a candidate lose Detroit, lose the black vote by a wide margin, and lose the majority of counties in the state, and still walk away the winner? Here's where the story gets stranger. Enter Mallory McMorrow. Weeks before Election Day, McMorrow suspended her own Senate campaign. She stepped back, reportedly under pressure from party leadership eager to consolidate support behind Stevens and avoid a three-way split. But here's the twist nobody fully accounted for. Her name never came off the ballot. Voters who had already made up their minds, who didn't get the memo, who simply didn't care that she dropped out, they kept voting for her anyway. Statewide, McMorrow pulled in roughly 4% of the vote. 4%. And El-Sayed's margin of victory? About 1%. Do the math, and suddenly those McMorrow votes look less like a footnote and more like the hinge the entire race turned on. In Metro Detroit alone, the region Stevens dominated, McMorrow still managed to peel off over 2% of the Election Day vote, even while absent from the campaign trail entirely. When NBC News finally called the race for El-Sayed, McMorrow didn't stay silent. She endorsed him almost immediately overnight, closing the loop on a strange, silent alliance that may have decided the outcome before anyone realized it was happening. But there's one more thread to this story, and it might be the most important one of all, because it reveals exactly how El-Sayed found his path to victory inside hostile territory. Even as Stevens was sweeping Metro Detroit's overall vote, something curious was happening beneath the surface. Break the region down by voting method, and a different picture emerges. Among voters who cast ballots early or absentee, the traditional institutional route, Stevens dominated. But among voters who showed up in person on Election Day itself in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties, El-Sayed won nearly 60% of that vote, compared to under 38% for Stevens. That single slice of the electorate, the walk-up voters, the last-minute deciders, the ones who didn't mail it in weeks ago, handed El-Sayed a margin of roughly 56,000 votes in the very region he supposedly lost. It was enough. It was more than enough. And turnout itself tells its own story. Over 2.5 million Michiganders cast ballots across all primaries that day, with more than 1.2 million participating in the Democratic Senate primary alone. A substantial jump from the 933,000 who turned out for the 2024 Democratic Senate primary between Alyssa Slotkin and Hill Harper. More people showed up, more people were paying attention, and in a race decided by a single percentage point, that surge in engagement may have been the deciding current beneath everything else. So now the story shifts. El-Sayed moves on to face Republican Mike Rogers, the same candidate who narrowly lost to Slotkin back in 2024, in a race to succeed the retiring Gary Peters. But the numbers from this primary leave behind a warning as loud as the victory itself. A coalition built on college towns and liberal strongholds got him through the primary. Whether it can carry him through Detroit, through Michigan's black communities, through the counties he lost by double digits, that's the question hanging over everything now. This was never a story about dominance. It was a story about precision, about finding the exact pressure points in a map and pushing hard enough in exactly the right places to flip an entire race by a single point. The primary is over, but the real test, the one that decides who represents Michigan in the United States Senate, is only just beginning.